of cohort 2 back in 2021, I believe. She will be our TA for most of the HTML and CSS modules. So I'm going to hand it over to her and have her kind of do a quick introduction and kind of share this week in particular, week 3 in the program. What were you feeling? What did you learn? What do you remember from your week 3 of cohort 2?
It feels like forever, but it is something that sticks with you the more you go on. I know it was really overwhelming in the beginning. It seems really easy, and then you hit a new coding concept and it gets a lot harder right when you get in. But ensuring that you have a setup now to follow, like you keep your schedule, you're doing it daily, things like that will really help towards the end. Otherwise, the only thing I was feeling is, I've done these projects a few times, but they do get easier to practice every time, and always keep adding on to them. Like once you take in JavaScript or once you take in React, always build off of them and keep adding them. And I still do it now, and it's been 2 years. So that's all I got.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I am not at my normal desk, so I've got some monitor blockage going on. So we are going to dive right into our news site for for almost all of today. Before we do that, let's do our stand-up. What did we learn on Thursday or last week? What kind of resonated with you guys? Or about the homework too? Anything? We use that text center class for the first time. We also use text end as well, right? That's the way to get our text to move around the different divs. Divs are just those containers, right? There are chunks of code, and we can use as many divs as we want, but those divs kind of help us organize our code, use different rows, use different columns, stuff like that. We also dug into Bootstrap a little bit with those rows and columns and containers. We finished up the weather app. Hopefully that was a good introduction into our HTML, into getting a fully functional page up and running. We learned all about those CSS properties, right? There are many more to learn, but we learned about border and color and margin and different ways we can lay things out. We also learned about those CSS selectors, which is how we can take those properties and apply them to chunks of our code. We learned about the inspect tool in Chrome, right? Which can be very helpful. That's basically giving us a look kind of behind the curtain of what Chrome is interpreting and how it's seeing our HTML. We learned a little bit about fonts. We'll be getting into Google Fonts a little bit later on in our project and learning about how we can use the basic web-safe fonts, but then also how we can bring in fonts like Open Sans and Roboto and a couple other popular ones that Google supports. We learned about the box model, difference between margin and padding, and the border, and kind of how margin is outside of the border, padding is inside the border, and how if we use padding, that will make our background expand, but if we use margin, that will kind of push that div away from other items. We learned about the Bootstrap grid and how it consists of 12 columns and how we can differently size those columns. So if we want 2 equal columns, we make it a 6 and a 6 because 12 divided by 6 is 2. Or in the weather app, we kind of played around with the sizing and figured out how we can get that to lay out the way that we want. Anything else from last week that really resonated? We use emojis for our icons. We learned that shortcut for getting our HTML started, right? When we create our file name index.html, if we hit the shift 1 or get the exclamation point in and hit enter, that's going to autocomplete. We'll be learning a lot more about, we'll be using that a lot more, I should say, as we keep on going. We will also work our way up towards the end of this project to learning how to use Prettier. And we also touched on last week that autosave, right? So that we are able to autosave without having to hit Command S every time we switch over to our browser. How are we feeling about the homework? Was there anything in particular that we found particularly hard on the homework? Is there anything that we want to touch on? I will say I am all caught up on grading, or I was around noon today. So everything should be graded in Canvas. That goes for your quizzes and for your homework assignments and the optional homeworks. I am all caught up on grading for that. Anything from the homework that we wanted to touch on before we keep going here? Palash, what's up?
So there was this assignment called a W2 free code camp, and it said it had like remarks on there that it does not have a due date, but you can do it before the end of the module. So it's submitted now because I don't think I touched it.
Totally fine to submit it now. You'll notice all of those assignments, all the optional assignments are 0-point assignments. That doesn't mean you don't get credit for them. That means you get extra credit for doing them. So if you go ahead and submit them, either you can copy and paste all of your code in, or you can upload a file, or you can just do a screenshot of basically showing everything's done in free code camp. That I will give you extra credit for doing those. Or if you get stuck somewhere and you're like, well, I got 90% of it done, this is what I'm stuck at. I'm happy to help you on those assignments as well, either at a one-on-one, or if you want to bring it up at the beginning of class, that is totally fine. And you do get extra credit for completing any of the optional assignments whenever you complete them. So the due dates are kind of more suggested due dates if there are due dates on those assignments. But if you are on week 23 and you want to go all the way back and do the optional assignments from week 2, that's totally fine. That extra credit gets factored in throughout the whole program.
So if I dare to ask, what's the suggested due date for this now?
For free code camp, the suggested due date is to get it done by the end of week 5.
Perfect.
However, if you get it done earlier, you'll find that whatever you're learning in free code camp will help you for the in-class assignments. So it's week 5 is kind of the rough suggested due date, but if you get it done earlier, sooner you get it done, the more it will help you, kind of thing.
Thank you.
Elias, what's up?
Hey, it's Alizé, but
Alizé, thank you.
That's fine. But so I have these career coach like imported assignments from like February. Are those supposed to be there or?
Great question. I would not worry about any of the career coach assignments until you hear from Laura. Laura is probably moving everything over from cohort 4 into cohort 5 in Canvas. So I would say hold off on the career coach assignments until you hear from Laura.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Any other questions? Oh, there's one thing I want to touch on. In Canvas, you may notice that your homework assignments are being reported as due at like 9:59 p.m. I have no idea why, but Canvas has decided that all students should default to Mountain Standard Time, and it drives me nuts. So it's actually all correct on our side. In order to fix that, I dropped a link in Slack to this. But basically, if you go to Canvas and over on the left-hand side, you go to Account and then go to Settings. Of course, it's going to make me sign back in. Once you sign back in, there is an option on the right for edit settings. You can hit edit settings and then under time zone, change it from Mountain, which I think it defaults to, down to Eastern time. and hit update settings. And you will magically find that when you go back into our course and look at the assignments, they should all be reported as due at 11:59 p.m. Not a big deal. You can turn them in you can turn them in whenever. The sooner you turn them in, the better that reflects in your grade. But the actual due date is 11:59 Eastern time. And if you would like your Canvas to show that, make sure you refresh the page after you load your assignments, and it will show the correct time zone. Okay. Any other questions before we dive in tonight? We are solely focused on the news site. Let me pull up a screenshot of what we're working on. And I'm going to offer an option because everyone is at a different level in their learning, right? And that's always pretty standard. The beginning of the cohort, we have some students who are have some HTML and CSS experience and everything makes sense to them. And we've got some students who are still playing that div matching game, right? Still trying to get everything lined up. So I was that kid in college and in high school who was always annoying the teacher because I was one step ahead. I just wanted to go faster. I wanted to get out of here. So if that is you, if you are following along with everything and you're like, I just want to do this and get it done, I'm going to post this screenshot in Slack. If you are able to complete this entire website, if you're able to build this website on your own, you probably aren't going to learn anything in the next day or two from me, and you do not have to be in class. So if you're one of those people who are super far advanced, you've got a lot of experience under your belt, you just want to bang out this site and get out of here, feel free to build it on your own. Send me a copy of it in Slack, and we will mark you as present for attendance, and you don't need to show up for the next day or two. So if you want to take that option, you can. I encourage all of you guys to stick around because you will probably learn something about the way I do it a little differently. But if you're looking at that mock-up and you're going, that's easy peasy, I can knock that out on my own, feel free to take me up on my offer, bang it out, shoot it to me in Slack, and we will mark you as present for class for attendance for the next day or two, and you can get out of here. With all of that said, we're going to go step by step through this process. And build out the site. We're going to do it in a slightly different order. So instead of building everything of the layout and then filling in the content, we're going to kind of go component by component and style it and load up the content as we go. Goggin, what's up?
So you want the site you're showing right now, this is what we have to build?
Yes.
Well, where's a copy of this? Is it on the assignments or?
I just posted a copy of it in Slack under the CICC Hive.
Oh, okay. I was looking over here in chat here.
I can post it there too as well if you're and that is an open invitation for anyone. Rain, what's up?
This seems similar to the free code web pages that we created, or is this more complicated in your opinion?
It depends. Like, this is probably a little bit more complicated than the cat photo app. This is also going to kind of test our knowledge of the Bootstrap grid system, which I don't think Free Code Camp does a deep dive on. But to me, there is a limit of how good you can get at HTML. And it seems to be a very binary thing, right? Like, it's not something that progressively gets better. You'll find that you'll reach a point where you're like, I just get HTML, right? Like, that makes sense to me. The divs all line up. The indentation works for me. I can take on Free Code Camp and not get hung up at any of those points. And HTML is one of those binary things. You either know it or you don't. And so the projects in class are meant to get progressively harder, but there's only there's a maximum level of hardness that you get with HTML where it kind of just clicks and it makes sense. So I would say it's probably a little bit harder than Free Code Camp, But if you get to the end of Free Code Camp and you're at the end of all of their exercises for the entire certificate, there are certainly challenges in Free Code Camp that are harder than this one. So it kind of depends on what you're comparing it to. Jen, for the same photos, you can use whatever photo you want on Unsplash. So they don't need to exactly match. You can pick whichever one you want, but the layout should be pretty similar. Does that answer your question? Cool. Gagan, what's up?
Can we start doing that now, or do I?
Yes, absolutely.
And just do it on my own and be
yep.
done.
You can do it on your own, and if you end up getting halfway into it and realize that it was a terrible idea, everything's on YouTube and you can catch up there. But okay. I do want to give that option to everyone because I know it can be frustrating to go slow on it. So either way is totally fine with me. No hard feelings. Rain, another question, or is that lingering?
No. Just a question. Yeah. So. Yep. Is there a way from Google Docs that we can inspect the element, not to copy, but to get an idea of, the code we're trying to target within our own webpage?
Yeah, so I will share with you I was hoping that GitHub would have it live for me, and it is being a little pain in my butt and doesn't have it live yet. So I will share the final version of all of this in the Zoom chat with you guys. That is the final code that we are working our way up to. However, I will caution you and say that when we write code, we never write code linearly, right? And when I mean linear, I mean top to bottom. And that was pretty evident in the weather app, right? Where when you're working on the weather app, it doesn't really make sense, the order that we do it. But then when we're going through the steps, it makes sense of, oh, we want to add this border. So we go over to the CSS. Okay, now we want to, change the font sizes. So we do that in another step. So if you are someone who just feels like class is going a little too fast for them, I recommend that you take a step back and say, I wonder what this class would be like if I don't follow along with the code. If instead of following along with the code, I take notes about the steps that we're doing and make sure I understand Max's code. And then after class, try and do that code based off of my notes, based off of the code that I have, try and go in the same order as the video. Some people find they are completely and utterly lost in class. And if they are lost in class, there is no hope for them catching up in after class. So instead, take a step back, relieve that pressure from yourself. You don't have to follow along in class. I will say probably 2/3 of the students find that that's the best way for them to learn, and they can directly relate that experience in, and that's great. I don't want to discourage you from doing that. We'll be taking breaks as we go throughout class to make sure that you can follow along. However, there are some students who just learn better by reading the code, understanding the code, not typing the code out, asking any questions they may have if they don't understand a piece of it, waiting until the end of class, and then after class or the beginning of the next morning or whenever it is, trying it on their own, following their notes, maybe using the YouTube video. Some people find that makes it click better for them. So if that is the case, that is totally fine. And this may be the right project to test that out. This may be the right project to try your own notes, to not code along. I will say if you are coding along now and are not having any problems, I would encourage you to continue doing that. But everyone learns a little differently. And if you learn by taking notes and just following along and then want to try it on your own, that's totally fine. At the end of this class, at the end of very few classes, we're going to ask you to turn this in, right? This is for understanding, this is concepts, and then our required projects tend to be a little different to be able to test that. So give that a try. Like I said, if you have been coding along so far, I encourage you to continue doing that to push yourselves. But if you are coding along and you get to the end of this and you're like, this doesn't make sense to me, or I'm getting lost throughout class, That's okay. Everyone learns a little differently, and I promise that this will equal out. By the time you get to JavaScript, everyone's going to be sweating bullets trying to keep up with me, making sure they're understanding the concepts. That gets into a little bit more computer science. Ariel put a note in the message that by the end of the cohort, you'll have me at 2x speed. So don't be alarmed if I'm a little fast. Everything speeds out a little differently. The good news is in cohort 1, when Eva was going around, our curriculum was very rough, right? We didn't know how to pace it. We were trying to cram too much in. This time, cohort 5, we make changes every cohort for our curriculum, but we've got a better balancing out of all of it. So I like to give people the option who are a little bit more advanced to jump ahead if they would like to, but at the same time, push people who may be a little less experienced on a bigger project, on something they may not be comfortable with, no matter what their learning style is. And I will say on YouTube videos, I do want to find a post. I will share that with you guys when I do. But you can work your way up. If you are listening at 2x and you're like, there's no way in hell I would ever be able to do this. It is a skill, not a talent. So work your way up, go on 1.25, see if that's making sense to you. If you want to push yourself over the next couple weeks, work your way up to 2x. But if you find 1x works great for you, that is totally fine. If you are going to try it on your own and are not going to follow along in class, whenever you get it done, you can just Slack it to me, and I will use that Slack message as a I will go in and mark you present for, it will probably be today and tomorrow we're working on this. Just stay tuned to Slack in case we end up wrapping this up early tomorrow, and I'll let you know. But it depends on the pacing of how long these projects take. But you'll definitely be excused from class tonight if you end up getting it done and slacking it to me. And if you want to work on it on your own and you're confident of getting it done, you're welcome to drop out of Zoom. You don't need to listen to me as I'm doing it. So I will use your proof that you finished the project as an excuse, not as an excused absence, but just marking you present. I'm going to try and close these blinds and see if that makes my lighting any better. Okay, any other questions before we dive in? Oh, maybe it's that lighting that's causing an issue. Give me 1 second. Okay. No, lighting's still terrible. Great. I'm sorry about that. It'll get better as the sun sets. Oh, that's like significantly worse. Okay, we ready to dive in? We do need to make a week 3 day 1 folder if you did not make it on Thursday's class. So I'm going to pull up where what we had created. So in my C5 My Code, I already have a week 3 day 1 folder. If you do not have that, you want to go ahead and create that as an empty folder. I'm going to take my week 3, my day 1, and drag it into my VS Code. That's going to pop it open here. And this is where we left off. We have all of this HTML in here that we haven't really used before, except for the Bootstrap and our style.css, which we do know and love. So we're going to get that open. We're going to hit our Go Live button. And when we go live, we should see a plain white page. And then I am also going to send you the live share class, the live share link. Remember, right click on that in the Zoom chat, hit copy link, go over to your live share icon on the left hand side, hit join, and then click sign in anonymously down at the bottom, type your name in at the top, hit enter, then paste that link in, and you should be good to go and have that up. See, a couple of you guys are already joining, so thank you. Oh, that lighting's much better. Give you guys a minute to join. If anyone needs help with the steps, let me know. Have both your copy open of the code and my copy open, and then make sure you have your live share on your live server, your go live button also visible. And raise your hand now if you need help, because if you get lost now, you'll be lost for the next 2.5 hours.
Max.
Yes.
So I'm doing the live share, and I'm looking at yours and I'm looking at mine that we set up last week, and it's looking different. The link and the style are above the meta links.
That's totally okay.
Okay.
As long as the style.css link is below the bootstrap link, that's all that really matters.
Okay, thank you.
And we're going to go through line by line there in a second. Okay. Last chance. Anyone need help? Jen, what's up?
So every time I open yours, it opens it in a new window and kind of like throws mine away.
So
Not
go
sure where it
file
goes.
in yours, go to file new window first. And
Oh, and
then
okay.
in the new window, you can join the live share with the link over on the left.
Gotcha. I gotta open the folder in here. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
VS Code is very persnickety about what windows it has open, and by default, it always thinks it wants to open whatever you're opening in the existing window, and that drives me nuts. So the trick is go file new window first, and then open it. Okay, so we're going to go through these lines just for a second, because there are some things that we know and love, right? Our HTML tag, or head tag, or body tag, those are all the same. But there's some more things in here that we haven't really seen before. So let's kind of go through them step by step. The first thing is this doc type HTML. This is telling the browser, hey, there are actually other kinds of files that use this similar syntax. This syntax is very similar to XML, where we have opening tags and closing tags and stuff like that. So the browser can actually read more document types other than HTML. So we put this very specially formatted tag up at the top to say, heads up browser, this document type, the one coming your way, is going to be HTML. Then we come down and we've got our HTML tag. We've seen them before, our opening and our closing, but we also specify lang equals EN. EN stands for English there. That is another browser-supported attribute that we add to our HTML tag, part of the I18N standard. The I18N standard is basically how we write code or content in other languages. So if we wanted to, say, support Spanish on this page, we would change this language code to ES, I believe it's ES for Spanish, and that would help the browser know not only, hey, this page is in Spanish, but it would help you translate it as well. So this is optional. Your HTML is not going to light on fire if you forget to add this, but it is a way to support more languages in your website, and help things like Google Translate work if you're going to support users who may be reading or may speak different languages. Our head tag is the same, no real changes there. This meta char set, UTF-8, meta is another way to tell the browser, heads up, this is some information that's going to work under the hood. This is more information about how we would like you to treat our HTML code so it shows up right to the browser. The first one we do is a char set or car set. I've heard it either way. Stands for character set. And we say UTF-8. Does anyone, I will be impressed if anyone knows this, anyone else know a different character set other than UTF-8? So for a long time, and what the computer defaulted to back like Windows 98, Windows 95 days, was something called ASCII, ASCII. ASCII was a way to make every letter on your keyboard encoded into binary. So basically, when the computer stores all of our information, it's all zeros and ones, right? Well, there's some way that we need to be able to convert those zeros and ones back out to letters. And for the longest time, ASCII was the standard that everyone used. It was the most basic. It's what worked. But the problem is they ran out of room. ASCII couldn't support things like Chinese characters or these things that came along and became very popular called emojis. And so older web pages couldn't support emojis because there literally wasn't enough room in binary to store the emoji. And so UTF-8 is a much more updated standard that supports a wider range of characters. That character set is called a char set, and that's why we say UTF-8. Now, I believe most modern browsers will default to this if we don't set it in the meta, which is why we haven't needed it up until this point. However, it is considered kind of more proper HTML to put that meta tag in. Any questions on that? Speed through the rest of these as quickly as I can. This is for Internet Explorer. Yes, we go all the way back to those days. IE is our Internet Explorer. And basically what we're trying to do is tell Internet Explorer or Edge, which is what replaced Internet Explorer, that if there is a newer version of it, try and support this page using the latest Edge standard. So this is a way to tell Internet Explorer or Edge, heads up, this code is written, it's modern, try and render this with the latest standards possible. And so that's what this code does. The next line is about the meta viewport. The viewport is literally the white box that we see in our browser, right? All of our HTML content shows up inside this viewport. This is to make our viewport mobile responsive. What that means is that whenever you go on an old website on your phone, you know how it loads in super zoomed out and you got to pinch in to make it all work. This line of code is telling our viewport, heads up, we want access to the device's width. And we want the initial zoom on our website to be 1. Because we get access to the device width later on in our HTML, when we get into responsive coding, we're going to learn how we can adjust that so that the page may load in to a different rendering, a different size than if we have our page on desktop. So responsiveness in Bootstrap won't work unless we tell the browser, hey, heads up, some meta information. On the viewport, we want access to the device width, and we want to set the initial zoom or scale of the page to 1.0. This is super important. If you ever are writing responsive code and you don't have your meta viewport set up here, you may be wondering why the grid isn't working properly or why your responsive code isn't working right. This is a super important line of code. Okay, our our title tag we've seen before, no real changes there. That is setting the tab in the browser. We link into Bootstrap. We've seen that before. That's what allows us to use rows and columns and containers and all of that stuff. We also have our link to the style.css, and then our body and our closing HTML tags don't change. Hopefully none of this is earth-shattering. These are all things that I would recommend that you use whenever you start a new HTML page. Hopefully it gives you a little bit more context. I have never seen an employer kind of narrow into any one of these three during a technical test and ask about it, but they are everything in here. The doc type, the language, and the three meta tags are all three recommended things that make your modern HTML pages show up better in the browser. Any questions?
I have a question. It's Tara.
Shoot. Yeah.
When I set this up on Thursday and I used the shortcut in front of like where my brackets should be for like my head and my body, etc., I have colons. So should I go through and change those? Because I don't know. Just defaulted to that, or because I didn't change any of that. I just added in the
you mean you've got like a colon here?
Yes, instead of the bracket.
Look at your index file. Does it end in .html?
Yes.
So what I would recommend is copy these two link tags so that you have them in your clipboard.
Mm-hmm.
Delete the whole page, Command A, delete.
Okay.
Then do your exclamation point, enter, and see if those colons are still there.
Okay.
Success?
Oh, yeah. Okay, it did work that time. So I'll just
Cool.
add the back in.
And then just add those, those two link tags back in. I'm not sure I'm not quite sure what you did to get those colons in there, but as long as it's working out, that's all that really matters.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, we ready to dive in? So first things first, I am looking at what we're trying to create, and I've got this big blue border running across the top. Now that looks like just a div to me, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to ignore everything on this section of the page. We're going to ignore these links. I just want to get these three working properly. So I am going to go into my VS Code, and I'm going to do my div class container, because I think everything in my site needs a container. And then I'm going to do another div, and I'm going to call that ID, and I'm going to call that top bar. Why am I adding an ID on that already? Well, I know I'm going to need to style the things in it. So while I'm writing my HTML, I might as well think a step ahead, add in my ID there. And I'm also looking at this and I'm going, all right, this looks like three separate columns. So we're going to go ahead and add that in. So I do my class equals row, and I do three columns. I do my div class col, and the first thing that goes in there is menu. I'm going to do another div class col, and I'm going to say CIC news. And I'll do another div class col, and I'm going to say login. go back over to my browser. I take a look at, you can get this loaded all into the same browser tab. I take a look at this and I've got my menu, my CIC news, and my login, and they're all going across. You guys a minute to catch up on that code. Make sure you've got them all in a row. Make sure they look like they are evenly spaced out. Make sure your indentation is correct. Make sure the font is not in Times New Roman. If it's in Times New Roman, you probably don't have Bootstrap added in. Make sure you've got line 8 here. Thank you guys for, almost everyone has their cameras on. It helps me to know when to move on. And I will start a poll as we keep going here. Anyone need an extra minute? Quota, what's up?
I just have a quick question. Can you please explain like the difference between putting the ID and the class in the same div?
Yeah, so we can use as many classes as we want, but we're only allowed to use one ID. So if for whatever reason we wanted to add a class called card on this, we could add a space and add that card in there. When we are in our CSS, we need to pay attention to what we called it, right? So if in our CSS, if we wanted to target the row, we would have to use a period and we would say row, and then we would say, you know, background color blue. However, if we wanted to target that top bar, we would come in here and say top bar background blue. And that would work as well. So if we take this code out, you'll notice they're both blue. The thing with a class is that you can reuse a class, but an ID must be unique. So if we wanted to use that class row in other places, we can. But we cannot use top bar again because it's already used here.
Okay, thank you.
Rain, what's up?
Okay, definitely not trying to ask too many questions. I'm working off 2 hours of sleep, but I started the web page myself. I knew that I needed a class equals container. However, when I type it in, it's not turning, you know, the proper colors as if it's, you know, good to go. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. It actually took for me to copy what you wrote, which looks exactly like what I have, in order for it to be active.
Share your screen. Usually the problem is the line above what you're coding, but we can take a quick look.
All right, so let's go and take this out. Not sure why it's not allowing me to delete right now. Is it allowing you to?
I can let me request remote. So the only thing that I see missing here, oh, you got in insert mode.
That's what's
crap, what is that key command? I have to Google that. Give me 1 second.
okay.
Um,
I'm gonna Google it while you're doing it. Actually.
Function enter, it says. So head back over to your code and then
1 second. Zoom.
So what is this cat coming?
Here, if you hit control and right arrow, that's going to take you over to your other space. And then in here, oh, okay, so function enter.
Man, are going to be doing some serious time in an exclusive health club.
I have no idea what this normal is. So what I would recommend is let's just try closing this and reopening it, because I think your cursor got stuck in some weird mode there.
Okay.
So if we go file, new window, file, open recent, day 4. Oh no, it's not day 4.
That's my homework.
I'll open recent, week 3, day 1. Okay, now.
Let's try it now.
No, your cursor's still white instead of just a line. It's like a block.
They're moving on this.
Ariel, any ideas?
I have absolutely nothing.
I was sitting over all the time, like, it let me type it, but then.
Well, what happened?
Please, G.
It's like stuck in like read only mode. Like you can't, you can highlight things, but you can't delete.
Is she in the right file? She's not in yours at all, right? Because mine's the only one that came in read only that I saw on your live.
No, this is over here.
Actually in your, okay. I just wanted to verify.
I did have a split screen initially before we shared.
Okay, hold on. Let's try Control Shift I. Ah, you're back.
Oh, good.
Control Shift I. Well, I thought you were.
How about this? I don't want to take up too much time. I'm just gonna go ahead, put all these, go back in, hurry up and just.
Or quitting the VS Code, I think.
Well, we tried closing out of this window, and the weird thing is that if you get outside of this project, like it's not a problem in other VS codes. This normal thing, I think Sarah's on the right track, is the problem. Let me just try one more thing. If you go, you can also press Control Shift I in Mac OS Control. Have this problem. It's not like you've got the Vim extension installed. Yeah, let's try cursor style. No, that's set right too. So it's something weird with this. Code Runner. I don't know how Code Runner would be on, because I don't even know what Code Runner is. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to bump you, and then when you get to break,
the Code Runner or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I tried to Google it, and it says that Do you have like other extensions running or something?
I have other extensions on Google Chrome, but not within VS, no.
Okay.
Can you go into the terminal over here in the screen?
Yeah.
And type in dir dir.
dir is a Windows command.
Oh,
not a Linux command.
Yeah, I was trying to look up why is it it should work in the terminal, it says.
PWD is for path and then an ls is for list all files, but
Yeah.
there are no hidden files there either.
That's crazy.
Well,
there's always something new every cohort that I don't know how to fix, and we eventually got it fixed, but the normal thing is what's really, I think, the issue.
Well, again, I'll just start over and just retype it real quick. I mean,
oh, you do have the Vim extension installed. Did you do that intentionally?
Yeah, that's the problem.
I didn't.
Okay, yeah, you shouldn't have the Vim extension installed because that creates all kinds of headaches. So now that it's not in, now that I uninstalled it, you're back to editing. And if you just shift tab this over and this over and one more for your container, you should be all caught up. And if we go live, you can see it and you're good to go.
Thank you.
Sorry that took so long. Good to go now. Okay. Anyone else need help? Okay. So let me close out of this. So we've got everything in here. And the first thing I notice is that in my final version, menu is on the left, CIC news is on the middle, and sign in is on the right. Well, my menu is on the left, but my CIC news isn't in the right spot and my login isn't either. That is an easy fix. I head back over to my code, and classes, remember, we can add multiple classes, but we can only ever add one ID. So for the class, I'm going to add text center onto my CIC news and text end onto my login. So I save, I come back over, and it looks like it's in a good spot. So just a space and then my text center and a space and my text end added to the right divs. Now I'm looking at my final version and I've got this nice blue background going on there. So I'm going to come back to my document. I'm going to open up my style.css and I've got mine set at the bottom. So to do that, you can open style.css, right click on it and hit split down, and that will open it down in the bottom part. And then I just drag this bar to kind of get it out of the way. From there, I've got this whole div. I want that whole thing to turn blue. Now, you may be tempted to just use the row here. However, if you use the row, every single row is going to turn blue whenever we create a div class row. We definitely don't want that. We only want our top bar to turn blue. So I'm going to use a pound sign because it's the ID, and I'm going to say background, and I'm going to say navy. And I hit save, and I get this, and I'm like, ew, where did my text go? Well, if I look really closely, if I highlight it, I can see my text is still there. So all I need to do is add a color of white. So I add that, I hit save, I come back over and I'm like, all right, we're getting somewhere. But what's going on with these nubbins over on the side? There's some white gaps there. Well, that's kind of interesting. because I've got my container and I'm looking at this whole site and I'm going, well, I don't want a container. I want it to kind of spill out to be the whole width. Well, instead of me just telling you what to do, we're going to go to the documentation. You don't need to follow along with me on this step for getting to the docs. But if I do go to get Bootstrap and go to the docs, instead of just going down to number 2 and grabbing the code that we need, I can come over here and look at all the documentation they have to offer. And I'm going to go down to containers here and see, all right, here's the container. It sets a max width at each responsive breakpoint. Well, we know what the max width is. We're kind of getting that behavior right now. The width of our container won't get any wider than what's right here. And it's constraining anything inside the container into that space. Well, that's helpful, but I don't want that. I still want to have everything in a container so I can use my grid. Where do I go? How do I get that to spill all the way out? Well, I do that by using container fluid, which says its width is 100% at all breakpoints. Now, I'm doing this to show you that no one has all of Bootstrap memorized in their head. No one has all of these classes. Of course, you'll have some. You'll have your rows and your columns, and you'll always remember those. However, it is important to understand that you have to read the documentation. Taylor, thank you for picking up on my very particularly used words. I don't know why it took me 10 years to realize that the reason why they call it container fluid is literally because they like it to be treated as a fluid. It will literally spill out and take out all the available space that it has to it. So fluid is mainly used with the container, but that concept is still there, right? You don't want to say container full width. That's kind of a weird name. Fluid just means that it's going to take up all the available space that's available to it. So I come back over, and in my container, I have to match very carefully. So you see that they're using a period here while we are using our class, so we're all lined up. All we need to do is add in our dash fluid. So I add in my dash fluid, I come back over, and now I've got the full width going on for my container. Just by adding that dash fluid here. Okay, I'm going to finish this up because instead of doing all of our layout, we're going to go component by component. We're going to get our divs completely finished before we move on. So I come back over to my news page. What's the one thing that you notice here that we don't have here?
Padding.
Our padding. And so right now we feel like we've got just a line of text, right? But if I come back over to my my top bar and I add in a little padding on the top of 15 pixels and a little padding on the bottom of 15 pixels and save that, now that looks identical to what I've got in here. It is amazing what 30 pixels of padding will do for a component to make it feel like a complete design. So I'm going to leave this up on my screen, and I'm going to launch a poll just to make sure that everyone is caught up before we move in to our next section. And if you are taking that notes approach, if you are trying to not follow along with the code, but you're getting the understanding, you're taking those notes, you want to use that no, I'll catch up later option. That is specifically for you. Or if you're still working on it, don't vote at all. And that way I know you guys are still making progress.
So I just have one question.
Yeah.
So, okay, can you explain again why we use the ID indicator for that top bar instead of like, oh, never mind. Never mind. I already
So we could
answered.
add a class, right? If we take this top bar and make it a class instead, you'll notice everything breaks over here. Well, that's because we told it was looking for an ID here instead of a class. So we can add a class onto that, and now all of a sudden everything's exactly the same. The thing is that we're never going to use this class again anywhere else on the page. So because we are identifying just one spot that we want to style, it's better to use an ID and make that ID in here line up. So it's really, they achieve the same exact thing. The ID is for when we want to style one specific piece compared to the class, which is a reusable style thing that we could use across multiple components. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, most of you guys are voted in. Last call for help. Anyone need a minute? Okay, so we got one section of our site done, on to the next. So I come back over to my news page and I go, all right, this needs it next. I'm going to call this my links bar. And we get to make all of this from scratch. And for the first time, you're going to see what we can do without using a column system. We're going to lay this all out and play around with our margin and our border and our padding to get everything spot on there. So I come over here and I'm like, ew boy, div soup. We've got all these closing divs here. And whenever we make a new div, it's not, the most important thing is not just making the div, it's figuring out where that div is supposed to go. So I'm going to leave myself some comments in here. I say, this is the end of login call. This is the end of my top bar div. And this is the end of my container. Okay, well, I'm looking at this and I want my links bar over here to be part of the container, but I don't want it to be part of my top bar. I want to move down the page. Whenever we move down the page, we probably want a new div. So that to me says inside my container, so above this line, but not inside my top bar, which is this div. That means I'm going to put my cursor at the line of 23, hit enter, and that's where I'm going to create my div. And from there, I can add in my ID of links bar so we can style it as we go. In here, I have to be careful because if I end up putting everything all together, if I say top stories and I say news and save and go look at that, okay, it's there, but I can't individually control the space on the left or right side of this without putting in a bunch of spaces, and that's just hacky. So our first thing, our first instinct, and you don't have to follow me on this, may be to put a div around each one of them. Again, you don't have to follow me if you're coding along. But let's just see what happens here. I'm going to put a div on both of them, put the word inside of it. I save it, and now it's down on the next line. Well, there are some ways we can change that with the display property. We can actually tell our divs to display in line, but that's not the cleanest or the best approach. Does anyone know what HTML element we should use instead?
I think your live stream is off.
What's wrong with the live stream?
The live share for the code.
Is anyone else having issues with the live share? So it's probably just a connection issue. I would close the live share and try and rejoin it, and that sometimes kicks it back into place. So a couple options in the chat. We could try p tags. Let's swap that out. And if we do p tags, we run out with the same issue, except now we got a little bit of spacing. Well, we could try h1s, but if we do an h1, it's going to be huge. We don't really want to change that. So what we are going to do is we're going to use span tags. Span tags are different than divs in that they act like inline elements. In other words, all the elements stay together in the same line. So whoever answered span tag, you're totally right. That's the right answer. So I'm going to do span tags here, and I'm going to do span tags for everything that I need. I'm going to do my sports, and I'm going to do my span for the life section, and come back over here. I save. It's not pretty, but we got all of our content there. Give you guys a minute to catch up on that. Okay, once we get all of that in, we want to do some cleanup here. We've got this, and the first thing I notice, I always work on my CSS from the first thing I notice down to the little details of everything. So the first thing I notice here is that it is centered. And if I look at my version, it certainly ain't centered. So we can fix that two ways. We can go to our links bar and say, nope, we have to be careful. Class equals text center. Notice what mistake I almost just made there. I tried to add a class to my ID. Bad idea, would not work. So I've got everything centered here. That's totally fine. You can do that. Or you could come down here and go get our links bar and say, hey, in the links bar, I would like to text align center. And if we do that, we don't even need this class on here. I can save, and you'll notice everything stays centered. Two different approaches, both do the exact same thing. So you can add that class equals text centered, or because we're going to need to target this links bar for some styling, you can add the text centered onto that. That will totally work fine as well. Okay. Next thing I notice here is I go back to my site and I've got this nice gray bar, and that gray bar is kind of separating out the rest of the site. We're going to achieve that by going to our links bar and saying, hey, we're going to put the border, but only on the bottom. We don't want a gray line at the top or on the sides. We only want that gray line at the bottom. We're going to say 1px solid gray. I save, I come back over. Now I got my gray line there. Eva, what's up?
My list, my link buttons are listed from top to bottom, not left to right.
Are you using span tags?
Yeah. I did the same thing you did. I div class equals row, ID equals link bar, and then I have spans for all four, close div.
You said you have a div class equals row in the links bar?
Yeah, is that the problem?
Try taking that class row out and seeing if that fixes it.
It does. Thank you.
No problem. Bootstrap version 5 uses the flex system for laying things out with the grid, and that flex direction can change how the span links or the span tags work. So taking that row out is why it fixes it. Alize, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure what I just did, but there's like a whole, it's like a bunch of like weird extra text in my window. Like in my life.
Normally that's because you're missing a closing tag. Do you see anything jump out at you, or do you want to share your screen?
I think I'll just share just for the sake of.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Right over here. Like this is what this looks like.
You can start your screen share.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is what this looks like, and then this is.
Ooh, boy. So this is some JavaScript that is behind the scenes that you shouldn't be seeing. And sometimes it happens because like you save your file as you're typing before you have a closing tag in. I don't see anything wrong with any of this. So the trick is if you hit proof for the remote.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. I know it appears on different screens. Usually the trick for this, and this is good for everyone to see, if you see any of this code and you're like, I have no idea what any of that means, stop your live share and restart it. And that usually fixes the problem.
Okay, thank you.
That comes up at some point in every cohort. So glad you asked.
All right, yeah. Looks good.
Anyone else need help? Okay. So let's keep going. I got my links bar. I got my border showing up. I'm feeling good about that. But what do we notice about this that's got it spaced out well up here? We've got more padding on that. So I'm going to head back over to my CSS. Bad max, I had my indentation wrong there. So I come down here and I say, all right, I'm going to add some padding to the top of 10 pixels and some padding on the bottom as well for 10 pixels. I save, I come back over, and now I've got a little bit of breathing room. Now, why did I have to use padding there instead of margin? I didn't want that space to be on the other side of this line. I wanted the padding to push that border down a little bit. So remember, in the box model, it always goes content, then to our padding, then our border, then our margin. All right, let's finish up our links bar and we can take a break. So I'm in here and I'm looking at this and I'm going, all right, there's space between the news and the top stories. But I got a problem. I've got span tags in here, and there's a very good chance that I'm going to use span tags somewhere else on my site. I could come in here and add a class to each one of them, but that seems like overkill. If I add a class to each one of them, my HTML is going to get messy. Really, all I want to do is say select all the span tags, but only if they are in the links bar. Well, we can do that. We can get fancy with our selectors. In our CSS, we're going to go find all the IDs with links bar. And then I'm going to say, but grab the span tags in. Alize, you got it. And then I'm going to add some padding to the left of them of 10 pixels and padding to the right of them of 10 pixels. And come back over. That achieves what we want. But padding isn't always the best option. We don't really, because we're spacing the elements out and pushing other ones away, while padding gets the job done, margin is the better option here. And margin is the better option just because we're using it to position other elements away from it. And in general, while either gets the job done, we are going to switch to margin on that because we're spacing other elements out.
Max, can you repeat one more time why we, in this instance, you use margins versus padding?
Yep. So we use padding whenever we kind of want to extend the area of the background, extend the area where the border is going to show up. The padding is kind of more content related, right? We're saying, hey, we want our content to have a little bit more space. However, when we use margin, margin is more about taking the other items that are around this item and pushing it away. And so we can achieve the exact same thing in this instance by using either padding or margin. But we use margin when we're thinking about it as creating space from other elements, as opposed to padding, which is giving the content more space. And in some situations, those are exactly the same. But we're going to run into a situation here where we're going to be working with the border. And at that point, padding versus margin may matter. But basically, like I said, you could get away with either one in this situation. But whenever we think about making this have more area from other elements, we want to think about margin. Okay, we're going to round this out here. I'm going to go back to my new site, and I've got this nice orange line going on here. This is meant to represent kind of what section we're in, right? If we clicked on top stories, the section would move over there. If we clicked on news, the orange bar would be under that. And we've got a nice bold thing going on. Well, I am in a tricky spot here because I don't want to put that styling on every single span, but I also only really want it to apply to one. So to pull that off, I'm going to add an ID and I'm going to say active link. Now, we could accidentally have an active link somewhere else on the page. We shouldn't really, but in case we do, you know what? I'm just going to target it. Change my mind. Just going to target it directly. It's an ID. It should be unique. We added in our ID here. We can make our active link here. Now, first thing I notice, that link is bold. So that should be a quick one. We say font weight bold. And this is a good reminder, don't get too far in your code without checking live preview. This is a good stopping point. Even though we only wrote a couple lines of code, we want to make sure those lines of code are working, because otherwise we've got a lot more we need to debug. So I come back over here, I look, and I've got my bold showing up. Okay, doing good. Come back over here. Now I've got that orange section I want to show up. Well, that could be a border, but it's only going to be a border on the bottom. So let's try it as 1 pixel solid orange. I save, I come back over, I look. Well, there's my line, but I'm looking at the line over here and it's a lot thicker. So to fix that, we just go to our styling and we say 5 pixels, save. And I got that line and I'm like, okay, we're almost there. But what's nice about the design over here, that line kind of blends right into the border. But I can't use margin to push that line down, because if I use margin and say 10 pixels, that line didn't move. If I try 30 pixels, nothing's really happening. What do we want to use to push that line down so it's on the proper spot? Padding. You guys got it. My favorite question apparently tonight. Let's start out with 5 pixels. And I save, and it's still not right. And I'm like, all right, I want to zoom in on that. So I hit Command and plus, and that's going to blow up my interface so I can really see that. Now we could come over here and fiddle with this number until we get it right, but we are developers and we like our tools. So instead, what I'm going to do is come over here and go into inspect. And down in my inspection, let me just pull this out a little bit more. I can see, if I click on my sports, I can see that padding bottom from my active link that's coming from my CSS. So something kind of cool I can do is I can single click on that 5px and hit the arrow up button and up that value until it lines up perfectly with what I want right here. Now, the problem is if I hit the refresh button, it's going to go back to where it was at. This inspect shortcut is just a way that I can preview what those values will look like without having to keep on changing it on my code and switching back and forth. So now that I know that 8px looks right, let's just try it at 9. No, it's over the line. We zoomed in. We know that's exactly where we want. I come back over to my code. I get my 8px in. Looks right over here. And finally, I'm going to hit Command 0. Oops. In my top part, that's going to reset my zoom back to 100%. All right, that was a ton of code. We're not going to go on break until most of you have it working. So I'm going to kick off the poll and give you guys a chance to catch up here, and then we'll figure out what time we're coming back from break after that.
Max, I did get it, but can you just show one more time in the inspect how you move the arrow up?
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to hit Command plus a couple times just to blow up my code so I can see it easier. I'm going to right click and hit inspect. And based off of where you right click, that will automatically highlight what you right clicked on. So if it's not in the right spot, you can just click on your span here. You may need to like expand some of the code, but you want to get that active link sports selected. Then over on the right side here, we see this padding bottom 8px. If I single click on that, that's going to highlight 8px and give me like a text box that I can edit it in. And then I can hit the up arrow or the down arrow and it will live update those values. There is no one-click transfer though. So once you have it in the spot that you want to take that value and update your CSS over here. That will refresh the page, get it in the right spot. I can close out of my inspect, and then in my page, I'm still way zoomed in. So instead of hitting Command minus a bunch of times to get back to 100, you can hit Command 0, and that will zoom you back out to that level.
Thank you.
Jen, I have no idea why your orange bar would be longer than mine. Check your span tags and make sure that your closing span tag is in the right spot, and make sure your ID has like proper closing quotes. And if all of that looks right, share your screen. Shannon, Command 0 is what resets zoom back to regular level. It might just be that you're zoomed in. No, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't look wrong, but it's totally right either.
It kind of looks like your font is bigger than mine.
There's one thing that I'm noticing that's bothering me. You've got an extra quote somewhere. Scroll up in your code. I'm noticing it right here. Where is that coming from though? Let me quickly request remote. Sometimes it's easiest to hit the little find icon here, go up and click on that. Why are you not letting me in there? I don't think that would. Found it. Lurking all the way to the end of your head section. That doesn't solve your problem though. Did it? No. I wouldn't worry too much about it. I do an inspect. You've got your margin on it. Oh, your padding is applied at 8 pixels around everything. So if you look at my, if you look at your padding, it's at 8px. And if you look at my padding, it says margin bottom 8px. So your padding got applied to all 4 sides as opposed to just the one side. And so now when we put in just the bottom, it applies properly. Did Ariel actually beat me to that, or did I figure it out?
No, I thought you said margin bottom, so I wanted to clarify.
Oh, sorry, padding bottom. That's what I meant. Padding will always affect the border, margin won't. Goggin, what's up?
Do you want to see it, or should I just send it?
Just send it to me. I'll look at it during the break.
I think the Joe Biden is like grayish too. Let me see.
I had Joe Biden on mine.
Yeah, Joe Biden. Oh, okay.
As the author. Yeah, it's a little lighter gray.
2 things over there. All right. I'll fix that right now.
All right, most of you are voted in. Let's go ahead and take our break. We'll be back at 7:30, and I will stick around just for 2 minutes in case anyone needs help.
This isn't really like a question about the code, but so when I inspect pages in my browser, do I always have to click those 3 dots to extend the code, or is there a way that like it'll already be opened up?
What do you mean the 3 dots?
So like when I go to inspect page, like in the browser, when the elements tabs pops up, it just has like my head tags and then the code in between.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What you can do, when you right click inspect, instead of just doing it like on a random spot in the page, right click on an item in the page and hit inspect, and then it will automatically open up all of those little dots to whatever you right clicked on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Great question. Anyone else? Okay. See you guys at 7:30. And let me resume recording. One of my favorite Giphies of all time. Welcome back, everyone, by the way, from break. This is one of my favorite Giphies of all time. And let me, come on, replay it. If anyone feels like this on their CSS, if you're really trying to figure it out, and it's like the blinds for the first time, and no matter what string you pull, it doesn't quite do the right thing. And then eventually you just get to the point where you want to take your CSS and just rip it out the freaking window. That happens. That to me is every time I do CSS. I would like to make it clear that the only reason that I am able to write this CSS and have it be perfect every single time that I do it is I might be cheating and be using the code from last year and referencing that as I go. So I don't want you to think that I am some CSS magician. I just happen to have done these projects many times before, and that is one way I can write it so smoothly. So you guys may find while you're going through this that like, how does he know that it's 10px? How does it just look perfect every time that he does it? You got to play with those values, right? You'll pick 20 and be like, no, 20 doesn't look quite right. Let me try 10, right? And depending on what company you're working at, your designer, you may have a designer on your team who hands you your design in Figma. And if it's in Figma, you can go in and literally inspect the values and pull all the hex colors out, all of the font spacing, all of the margins, all of that can come right out of Figma. But for the most part, when you're designing this stuff, you don't know. You just play around with it until you get it right, right? You say, all right, let me just use some margin there. And if the margin works and it does what you want it to, great. If it doesn't, and you're looking at the border and you're like, well, I want to move that border down and margin isn't working, you try padding. And if padding works, great, right? And over time, you learn what works better for different things. But at the end of the day, CSS is really just a matter of trial and error, right? And that's what those blinds always come down to, is playing around with it until you get it right. And right when you think you've got it right, you'll go to another web page and the CSS won't work there and it will work on your other page. And you're like, and you got to figure it out there too. That's totally okay, right? A lot of this comes with practice. But what I was going to do is, coming back from break, I was going to say, everyone take just 2 minutes right now, because it doesn't matter if we build out the rest of the site if you don't get what we're doing right here, right now. So go through the code. Yes, you now know that padding is what we use to make the bar a little bit bigger. But do you know why we use padding? If I said spend the rest of the class, which I'm not going to, but if I said spend the rest of the class rebuilding this, you can't look at your existing code. Could you do that? And if you can't do it, go through the code right now and figure out where your questions are. Go through everything and say, do I understand the order that we did this and why we did the steps? It's not really important that you get it all working. I mean, obviously that's important. That will be what matters in the workplace. But for right now, week 3, all of this stuff is about to build on each other. So go through, take 2 minutes and just see, do I understand everything we've done? And do I understand it to the level that I could create this all from scratch if I didn't have this code to reference? Rain, what's up?
With CSS, when I started to build this web page, I was doing period like we did with previous class. Is it that these concepts specifically will have, certain ones will have number signs or hashtags and certain ones will have periods, or is it due to the type of styling that we need that you use that versus a period, like when we did the homework?
Pound sign is always for ID. So because we did an ID of top bar here, it's got to be the pound sign here.
Okay, I'm just writing notes.
For the class, we actually haven't done a class styling yet. So for example, if I wanted to target all of the columns on the page, I would do a period here instead. So if it is a class in the HTML, we have to match that in our CSS with a period. If it's an ID, we match that with the pound sign in the CSS.
Yes. And again,
yep, go ahead.
And again, an ID we only can use once within the HTML.
Correct. And so that is why when I added this ID on, I knew that I specifically wanted to target only the items in this top bar. I knew nowhere else on my page was I going to have top bar styling that I wanted to apply to that section of the page. If I was going to have multiple things, which we'll get into in the stuff we're about to code out, I would use a class instead of an ID so that I could reuse it in multiple places.
And am I saying it correctly? And target multiple concepts within the HTML.
Target multiple elements or tags in the HTML.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Take a minute, read through that code. And even if you're looking at it and you're like, I don't know what question to ask, but I don't know this, it's okay. Tell me the line number or go back, think through those steps. What step did you feel a little iffy about? What were you like, oh, I didn't even think to do that? Where can we spend another minute just solidifying foundations before we keep going on this project?
So would you say, like, in terms of margins, like those are better at spacing things left and right as compared to like trying to align them in certain areas?
I think about, so it's kind of weird. I think about it like, let me try and do this. Let me try and do a whiteboard because it's a very visual thing. And this might make it click. Okay, so let's say that we've got our div here, right? And our div has some content in it. And let's say that content is centered. I think about padding as pushing the area around the content. Oh God, don't do that. How do I, oh. Well, seriously? Okay, sorry, let's try this again. Ignore that because apparently I can't delete it. Stupid Zoom. Okay, sorry, that was totally a bug. Let's try this again. We've got our content and that's centered in the div, right? And so I think about padding as pushing the space that the content takes out. It makes the div bigger, right? This is padding. However, if we have another piece of content over here, what margin is doing is making the space between here and here is our margin. So padding is kind of better at giving our content more space. It takes up more space and gives it more breathing room compared to margin, which is better for sizing the gaps around the content so that there is some space between it. Does that help at all or just confuse you even more?
No, that makes sense. I wrote it down in mind. Thank you.
Cool.
Max,
Jose, I would recommend screenshotting that just because your own organization is going to be way more important than being able to find it again in Zoom. With that said, I am going to screenshot it myself and take my own advice, and then I will add it to the daily outline.
Yeah, scoot over to the right, please, because we can only see like content over there, I think. At least I can.
You should be able to scroll around on your own.
Oh, I don't think we've ever used whiteboard with me. Never mind. Sorry, guys.
We have not used whiteboard before. And this is a very interesting experience for us all. Goggin, what's up?
I was gonna ask you if I could leave.
Oh yeah, go ahead, get out of here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good night.
Good luck, guys.
I don't think you have edit access to this, so you don't need to worry about that. But to screenshot on your Mac, you want to hit Command-Shift-4. That will give you this like cursor. Oh, you can't see my cursor. That will give you like crosshairs, and then you can click and drag across the screen, and that will screenshot for you. And then give it a minute, and the file will appear on your desktop as screenshot.png with a timestamp.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say also, like those three little dots up there, you can like export the PDF that you drew.
Oh, brilliant. PDF. Actually, let me do it as a PNG because it'll probably be easier to embed it.
What you say crying for?
Okay, cool.
Sweet.
Oh, I was there.
Yeah, Command-Shift-4 is for screenshots. So Command-Shift-4, you let go of all three keys, you draw, click and drag the area that you want to screenshot, and then that gets saved to your desktop. Okay, I'm going to close out of this, and I will make sure that that ends up on the daily outline as well. Any other questions? How are we feeling? We feeling like we could do this on our own? Feeling like we understand it? We're feeling like I assign this as a homework project. We could do this? And if not, oftentimes identifying where the problem is more important than what the problem is. So go back through, identify where you may be having any concerns before we keep going.
We ain't gonna say nothing. No, right?
Rain, what's up?
I feel like I can attack this solo. But question, with the three different columns that we have, the one that includes like the heading, the picture, the advertisements.
Yep.
I would still need to do like column hyphen and then a number. So in this instance, if Bootstrap is what 12, I would do 4, 4, and 4. But
for 3, 6, and 3, which is what we'll be doing.
Okay. So how do you determine, or should I wait till you get to that? Actually,
wait. Let's see if I answer the question, and then because that is what we're going to do next.
Okay.
Any other questions? I know it's always easier to follow along with me and then you go to do it yourself and you're like, where's that damn closing div? I can't figure it out. Everything's broken. It's okay. It happens. It comes with experience. But the more we build, the better we get at understanding where those matching divs are. The big red flag at this point is saying, do I understand the notion of divs within inside of divs? Do I understand that the opening div and the closing div line up? Do I understand how to add a selector onto my HTML to be able to target it and style it in my CSS? I don't expect you to know every CSS property right out of the gate, but hopefully while you're seeing me use these, you're getting a better handle on when I would use those CSS selectors or properties or whatever. Shannon, what's up?
Could you explain span again?
Mm-hmm. So what we have, and this is going to be another thing that's just going to make way more sense visually. So if I am inside my links bar is right here. So let's just temporarily, you don't have to follow me on this, but let's just throw in a div. And I say my div goes here. I save that and it looks like it's only taking up that little space, right? But if we hover over that in the inspect tool in the browser, look at where that blue area is. By default, divs are what we call block elements. They take up the full width of the space that's available to them. So this div isn't just taking up the tiny little part of the text, it's filling out the entire page while it can. Compare that to our span, and you notice our span is just that tiny little area. That's because our span elements are inline elements. So if we try to put another div in here that says my next div, it isn't going to show up over here because that first div is taking up all of this space. So the only other place that div has space to go is down here. Most elements by default are what we call block elements. They're going to take up that full space. So in order to have it work in line and say, hey, we want to be able to target certain parts of our text, but we don't want that text to wrap onto the next line or take up a whole block, we use the span tag instead.
Thank you.
Did that answer it?
Yeah, thank you.
There is very little worse than asking a question, thinking the teacher answered you, and still having no idea what the heck they're talking about. So never be afraid to call me out on that and be like, great answer, Max. That's not the answer to my question. That happens. Call me out on it. Makes you better, makes me better, makes the whole class better. All right, anything else? Kind of crazy that we're at 32 lines of HTML. We're at probably 24 lines of our CSS. But again, nothing else is going to make sense unless we understand these concepts.
Max, I have a question.
Yeah.
Why did the span element center those links?
That is because we put in our links bar a text-align center.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, and that's a good point. Sometimes the parent element, right, what these four spans are, will control the styling of what's inside of them. So this text-align center cascades down to these span elements because these span elements are inside the div. So the parent is controlling the styling of the children.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Anything else?
Is span always going to put them in a row, and if you put P's in there, it's going to put them in a column?
Yes. Yes. There are ways of controlling that. You can do a display : inline in your CSS, and it will make the P tag work like a span tag. Or you could say span display block, and then it would make the span tags work like a div. But that's not usually encouraged to play around with that property, especially as beginners. There is something called Flexbox Froggy that we'll get into probably next week. I think I have it as an optional assignment. And that's if you want to kind of break outside of the grid system, if you want to have more control over how much space your elements are taking out. Flexbox is a really powerful CSS concept that you can apply to lay out your pages. I'm not going to lie, it's not my favorite because I think it's way more complicated than grid. But with that complication brings a lot more power and flexibility with it. So if you are really loving front end and you get to the end of this course and you're like, I want to become a front end wizard, screw the back end, screw the database, screw all my APIs, I want to build websites, baby. Flexbox is definitely something that is worth investing, learning in how to build. Kenny, what we could do is the question was, instead of doing links bar span, could we do an ID on that? You wouldn't want to do an ID on this because you would be using the same ID on all four of them, and that breaks the rule. So what we could do instead, again, you don't have to follow me here, but if we wanted to say like link, we could take this link and apply it to all 4 spans. And it would help if I copied the quote with it and paid attention to where I was pasting. We could do this, and then instead of down here, we could just use that class, and that would still apply the styling to all 4 of them. One thing that I haven't covered and probably should, in CSS, in order to comment something out, we can't use our exclamation point with our double dashes. Instead, we use a slash and a star to start the comment, and then we use a star and a slash to end the comment. If you go ahead and hit save on that, you'll notice our spacing is now gone between our links. That is because we commented this code out. We basically said, hey, CSS in the browser, don't pay attention to this anymore. We want to kind of disable this. So you can do a slash with a star, or the other option is if you highlight all 3 lines, you can hit Command and slash on your keyboard. And VS Code is intelligent enough not only to put the comment in there, but if you hit Command slash again, it will remove that comment out. Okay, so I'm going to reverse this. This is not preferred CSS selectors because it's very repetitive, right? It breaks our concept of dry, don't repeat yourself. So it would be better to target the links bars span than it would be to target a class on all 4 of them. But you can see this achieves the exact same code, the exact same effect. It's just a matter of what we call code cleanliness. It's just not clean code in order to have this repeated 4 times.
That makes sense once you started writing it out. That seems pretty redundant and kind of annoying to keep doing that. But yeah.
Yep, you got it. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, Max, do you routinely just slap an ID on everything in your like day-to-day when you're coding?
No, I tend to only add IDs when I need to target a specific thing. Okay. And like I said, you know, I would prefer to do a links bar span than put a class or an ID on each one of these spans. But there are a lot of divs in here that we aren't targeting, right? Our container fluid, we put the container fluid in, Bootstrap knows how to apply that container fluid. I don't need to target that in my CSS. We're using our class row here, and we did need to target this specific one. So we put it in the top bar, but we didn't need to target the columns or anything inside of it. So you notice all of these divs are just Bootstrap classes. They don't have IDs on them. In general, it's better to not have an ID unless you are going to use that ID in your CSS to target that. So I would only add IDs as I need them for styling. And it's totally fine to make your div, make your classes, get all the content in there, and then go back and add in the IDs. You don't always need that foresight to add the ID right when you make the div.
Okay, great.
And, you know, a lot of this is subjective. I call this top bar. Someone else may call that a nav bar. Doesn't matter as long as it's consistent. When it does matter is when everyone else in your company calls that a nav bar and you call it a top bar. So team wide, you would want to make sure that you're using consistent language. The reason why I didn't call this a nav bar here was because this is what has our links. So that would technically be more of a nav bar. But again, doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you're consistent, as long as your selectors are applying the way you want, then that's totally fine. All right, can we keep coding? All right, so this is where we are going to take a quick break because we're looking at our code here. And what's the first thing that comes to our eye? It's not this word latest or the content in here. It's, man, we got a big hunkin' layout that we've got to worry about. We need to get this position out. And what I'm seeing here, and it's maybe a little bit more obvious when I expand this column is larger than these two columns. And so we kind of want to space that out and have an idea of what's going on. Well, if this looks like half the screen, that must be a col 6. That means that we've got another 6 potential columns that we can fill. Well, if we want this to show up and we want this to show up, these look like they're equal sizes. So I'm going to say this is a 3, this is a 6, and this is a 3. So to get that to work, what we're going to do is we're going to first, as with any div, it's most important to figure out where the div is going to go before we create the div or anything. So I'm looking at this closing div and I'm like, no comment on there, no idea where it's going to close. So I am going to put a comment in here and I'm going to click on this div down here. And it's going to highlight my links bar. I know that's where I want to be. So I'm going to say links bar, end of links bar. Okay, now I still want to be in my container. So I'm going to put an enter there. And I'm going to add in my div class row. Now, why don't I want to just dive into my columns? Because columns always have to go in a row. So I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to say I've got my col 3, and all I'm going to do is put, let's put an H2 in there that says latest. Don't worry about the styling of that. All I want to make sure is that that's showing up in the right place. So before I even do a col 6, before I add anything else in, I'm going to go back over and I'm going to make sure latest shows up where I want it to. Now, you guys are getting all the good shortcuts tonight. You may notice that typing div class col 3 is a lot every time you want a new div. What if we just want a div with a class name on it? Ready for this shortcut? If you type a period and type in COL-6, look at what's on my screen. You see how it says Emmet abbreviation? Does anyone remember where we saw Emmet before? Emmet is what let us use our exclamation point equal to generate that HTML at the beginning of the file. Emmet is a keyboard abbreviation system that makes it easier for us to write bulk code without having to type in every piece of syntax. So if we type in our period col-6 and hit enter, look what it did for me. Okay, let's test that out. I'm going to say, I think it's headlines that goes there. Okay, that's where the headlines will go. And then I'm going to test that again. I'm going to come at the end of my headlines closing tag. I'm going to type period col-3 and hit enter. And I'm going to put an H2 in there of ads. So I save that. I come over here. Bam, I got my ads where I want them to be. Now, I use my exclamation point enter all the time when I'm doing my professional coding. Starting HTML from scratch, great practice, but using a shortcut, totally fine. I will say that I do not use the period shortcuts for Emmet to create divs. However, every front-end developer that I know who's a senior developer uses Emmet like a wizard. And I have no idea. You think I write code fast? They can crank out a page in about 20 seconds, and I'm still drooling at how quickly they're writing code. So Emmet, really powerful tool, but I will caution you, It is a rabbit hole. You can fall down like Alice and keep on going on all of these Emmet concepts and lose track of your code. So be careful with Emmet. Very powerful tool, something that may be worth learning if you are writing a lot of HTML, but be warned, you can really get in deep with those concepts. Okay, so I'm looking at this and I'm like, all right, I think I've got everything where I want, and it kind of looks right, but it's kind of hard to tell, right? I could center my headlines text, but if I go back and I look at my design, I've got these nice lines, and those lines are really kind of anchoring the design, right? It's kind of giving ourselves space where everything's in a column, everything looks nice, but let's get those border lines in there. So what I'm going to do is, because I know I need to target the left column over here and the right column over here, I'm going to give those unique IDs. So I'm going to add an ID here that says left col, and I'm going to add an ID here that says right col. Then going to go to the very bottom of my CSS and add my left col, and we're going to start out with that one. So I want a border, and where do I want the border? This is the left column. I want the border on the right side of it. So I say border right, and I'm going to say 1px solid, and I'm going to use light gray. So I save. I come back over to my document, and I got a teeny tiny line there. Like, well, that's no fun. I want the line to extend the whole screen. Well, by default, this latest div, this element, is only taking up the space that it needs vertically. It is only taking up the space that it needs to fit that word latest in there. But I want this to go all the way down the page. Does anyone have any ideas of how I could get this line to go all the way down the page? I could use padding, but the problem with padding, let's play with that. If I add some padding in here, and I say it's going to be 400 pixels, and I want the padding only to be on the bottom of the element. Okay, now I've got it in here, but every time that I add in another section here, I'm going to have all this empty white space down at the bottom. And I don't really want that white space because this latest is almost long enough to make this line extend. Plush, I like your idea of height 100. Let's see what happens if we try that. So I'm going to say height 100 and save, and it's saying 100% of the height's text. Great, you got it. There's your line. We could try a horizontal rule, but the problem with the horizontal rule is it's not vertical. So that gets a line in the right spot, and we're going to run into the same problem with the margin, right? If we add margin to it and a bunch of content, we're going to have all that white space down at the bottom. So your idea of 100% is very close. Instead of doing 100%, remember what we learned about the viewport up here. We said meta viewport. What was the viewport? That's this entire area that our content shows up in. So instead of 100%, we're going to use 100 of the viewport height. This is a kind of newer CSS concept, but this is a very easy way to add that line all the way down. But we're going to run into some problems here. What if we put a ton of content? Actually, the content's not going to be the problem. What the problem is going to be is now we've got this scroll bar here. I'm like, well, I don't want that scroll bar. Why do we think we have this scroll bar when we use 100% of the viewport height?
Is it making
Think
the page
about
go all the way down?
what's that?
Is it drawing the page all the way down so it needs a scroll bar to go up and down?
It does, but I don't really want that scroll bar, right? I only want that scroll bar for at least to the bottom of the page, but no more of it. We have any guesses as to why we set 100 VH? That's 100% of the view. Why is it giving me a scroll bar down there?
Because there's like that nav bar and the top bar over there.
Bingo, that is exactly the answer. 100% of the viewport is measured from right here down to the bottom of the screen. But we've got all of this content up here that is taking up room in the viewport. Oh man, we're going to have to do my least favorite thing in programming. I have to do some math. So I'm going to hit my select in the inspect, and you don't have to follow along with me unless you want to. And I'm going to click on my entire top bar up here. I'm then going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to find out in my box model that this area of the screen is taking up 24 pixels. But we need to do the math. It's not just 24 pixels. It's an additional 15 pixels of padding on either side. So the way that we get this bar to extend all the way down for us is we tell it the height is going to be a calculation, a calc. It's going to be 100 VH minus the 24 pixels it took for our top bar, minus the 30 pixels of padding on either side of that bar. And I will note here, the spaces are very, very particular. You need a space on either side of the minus and no space after the unit. CSS Calc is the most fickle on syntax of anything I've ever seen. You literally just look at this wrong and it will look at an extra space and not do the calculation right for you. So be very, very careful on that. Then we need to repeat the process with this links bar. Our links bar is 24 pixels and 10 pixels on either side. So if I can math right, that will be 44 pixels. So I save that. I come back over here and okay, I may be 1 pixel off. Let's try 45 instead. Now look at what's gone. Actually, you know where my extra pixel is? It's in that border. That border is 1 pixel. So we have to do our math. We have to say it's 100% of the viewport height, but remove the pixels that it takes for the links bar and the top bar. And if we do that right, you'll notice our line goes down to the right spot. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from height to a min height. And the reason we want to do that is, what if I end up with 100 stories over here? Well, the height is fixed. It's saying it can't get any bigger than what can fit on the screen. That can cause all kinds of issues because we may want a scroll bar if there's a ton of content in here. So we use min height instead of height to make sure that that line goes down to the bottom of the screen. But if that div ends up needing to get taller, it can. Okay, that was CSS 200 level. We got a little bit more complicated there. This is certainly a step up in the complexity of our CSS. If you take nothing of this, one thing that you should remember, two things. One, VH stands for viewport height. That is a way that we can say we want, actually stands for vertical height, or viewport height. No, it's viewport height. That's how we can say we want it to be 100% of our screen height. And then the other thing to keep in mind is calc is a way that we can do some math in our CSS without having to hard code some values in there, like padding bottom 400 pixels. Take a moment, see if you can get rid of your scroll bar, make sure your border is showing upright. If all of that is working, take a moment, read through the code, see if you understand it.
Max, can you tell me where you got the 45 from?
So I kind of did some math off the top of my head. If you look at the links bar, it takes up 24 pixels for the content, plus 10 for the padding above it, plus 10 for the padding below it, plus 1 for the border.
Okay.
So 24 plus 10 is 34, plus 10 is 44, plus 1 is 45. So I did 45 here. Of course, you could do the same thing here. You could say this is 54 instead of 24 and 30. That would work. Or you could combine all three of those numbers and subtract just that. Doesn't matter. And before someone gets clever, there is no way that I know of in CSS where we can say 100% minus the links bar height minus the top bar height. That would require JavaScript, and we'll get to that down the road. Rain, what's up?
I have a question related to Bootstrap.
Yeah.
Just was thinking, let's say, for instance, I'm designing a web page for a mobile device from a mockup. Would it still be considered full screen 12 column on a mobile device when using Bootstrap?
It does. It is. So it is still 12 across. In our at the end of this project, we'll learn about mobile responsiveness and how we can make it not be 3 columns across, even on a smaller phone screen. So the good news is Bootstrap is mobile responsive. We just haven't gotten into that feature set quite yet. But yes, it is always 12, regardless of how tiny that 12 is. And that's a great segue. I'm going to finish up my right column. So I'm going to add in my right column. Oops, no space there. And I'm going to add my border of 1px solid light gray. And the good news, whoa, not light goldenrod yellow, bad. There we go. And the good news is because the height was already calculated for our latest, we don't need to calculate the height on our ads. It's automatically going to extend that full space. So our left col and our right col, don't forget to add your IDs up here so our CSS has something to select, and we are good to go. Do I sound weird to anyone else? Okay, great. Just Ariel's internet. There goes the bus, and there goes Ariel's internet that I pushed right in front of it. Okay, we're going to keep going here. We got our lines in, and now we're getting to probably next to calc, the most complicated concept of class tonight. If I pull up what we drew all the boxes around, hopefully we're seeing a lot of this lines up, right? We've got our orange row for our top, and then we did 3 columns to get that in. We have our orange row, but we didn't do any columns. We tackled that directly with our span. Now we've got our orange row. That's our row right here. What does that line up with? We've got our 3 cols. There's our pink, and our pink for the 3 cols that we're working with. Tara, what's up?
I just had a quick question. When we did our right column, how come we use just border and not like border left?
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh.
It should have been border left. Thank you for catching that. You that was, oh no, it's border left. Yeah. Otherwise you would have had a slight gray line at the bottom here and on the right side here, which would have been it would have been harder to see, but it definitely should just be border left because we only want it on that side. Great question. Thank you for catching that. Okay, so now I'm going back to my preview here, and we've got the word latest, and that's showing up the way that I want it to. But now we run into this issue where we want to have 6 minutes on the left, right? How recent ago that article was posted, with the headline on the right. But that poses a problem because we're already in a col 3. So this is where Bootstrap and the magic of nesting HTML really comes in. I can add in a div class row here. And this row, again, this is the second most complicated concept of tonight, if not the first, resets our 12 columns. That means if I just put the word row in here, my new row takes up the space that row fills now has 12 columns that I can subdivide out. So what I can do is I can say, hey, this pink area looks like it's about 25% of the column. That means this area must be about 75% of the column. Well, 25% columns are col 3s, and I'm going to say 6 minutes. And then the other col is going to be a col 9, and that col 9, I'll put something in like a headline. Now, this is really messy. We should never have 2 opening tags on the same line. So I'm going to take a minute and just fix my indentation there to make sure that that lines up. I save, I come over, and now I've got my 6 minutes and my headline 4. Take a moment. Don't look at my code. Don't cheat. Try this on your own. Try and get another headline to show up. Don't look at my code. Don't cheat. Like this. Notice that because we're using that grid system, everything lines up so well. It feels fresh. It feels like everything was meant to be there. We've got straight lines going down. That's our grid system. So give that a try on your own. And once you get it working, vote in the poll. Don't be afraid to raise your hand here. This is where we've got so many divs and divs within divs that it's very easy to get this wrong. So if you have it done and you think it should be working and you've gone through it and it's still not looking like this is where you raise your hand and we can share some screens and go through it. Low poll voltage, which means this is a little tricky for everyone, right? So don't be afraid to raise your hand. If you think you have it done and it's just not looking right, happy to help, but take your time. Excuse me. Slowly seeing polls tick up. That's a good sign. Don't be afraid to reference my code if you have a question or if you're like, how did he do that? You did get it working. Go through, make sure you can understand what section of our code is doing what. This col3, this whole big div here, this whole big div right here. And we go a layer deeper and we say, all right, what's going on with this row? This whole div class row is this row right here. That reset our 12 for us. So now we go in and we say, where's this div col3? That is right here. Where is our col9? That col9 is right here. How does our 9 and our 3 add up to 12? Because we use the row right up here to reset it. Now we take that row and we use it again right down here. And that, because it's using the exact same structure, is what makes this entire row here be the same as this row down here. We still divide by our col3. We still have our 9. Everything lines up the way we want. The only difference is this H4 takes up a little bit more room, so it pushes our row down on us. That is all we are doing tonight. If you don't have it working, you can either raise your hand now or walk away, try come back to it, And if you still don't have it working before class tomorrow, you use the beginning of class, we'll get everyone caught up. It is more important that you can debug it, that you can get unstuck from where you're stuck, than it is for us to move forward and keep on covering new concepts. So tomorrow, beginning of class, we'll see if anyone's stuck, or you can raise your hand now and I can help you through it. If you don't have any questions or you have it working, have an awesome evening, and I will see you guys tomorrow. And if you have any feedback, you can fill out the 30-second feedback form that Ariel just put in the chat. Or if you want to save it and kind of build up your knowledge for a couple days, that's also totally fine.
Why did we choose to use H4 rather than another like H2?
You could do an H2. It would be a little bit too big by default. You could do an H2 and then in your CSS shrink it down. It just so happens that an H4 happened to be the right size for what I wanted.
How do we know what sizes that they are?
You test it, right? You like, if
okay.
I put an H2 in here, and that just was a little too big for me. But if you're like, oh no, I like that design more, you can use an H2. That's totally fine. Believe it or not, it is a lot of just trial and error to get it to what you want. And on a bigger site, there would be more standards, as like this is literally the 4th biggest heading. So that's why you use an H4. But in this site, because we're kind of just playing around, whatever sizing feels best for you, use that for the H size. It weirdly stops at H6, so there's no such thing as an H7. But that's because most websites don't have 7 levels of heading sizes.
On my coding, so the first div class row that we use. So when I built the other lines, or when I coded the other lines, I didn't put the div class row at the top of each one.
Mm-hmm.
And when I tested it, it looks like it looks on the preview without the row up there. So did my row flow down into my other lines, or
so
is
you
that
got
correct not to have the row above each column?
both, a little bit of both. So you got lucky because your 9 and your 3 added up to 12. And so even though you didn't have your div class row, because it was taking up the full width anyway, because it added up to 12, it did exactly what you want without causing issues. However, the reason why we don't want to forget our row here is because the row actually, if I hover, it won't show it. There's actually a little bit of setup with a property called display flex that the div class row provides for us. Not to mention, looking at this code, it's visually much easier to see that this and this are in the same line, in the same row together, because they are in that same div. So even though it may have worked in the browser, for the reasons of having the display property set, the display set properly on the whole row, it is better to have each individual row in its own div instead of trying to skip that row.
Okay.
Now I'm just curious. If I comment this out. Now, see, that's interesting because if I remove my row, my columns don't work. So was this the row that you forgot, or was it a row maybe all the way up here that you forgot?
It was the row before my second headline.
Okay.
Top.
Yeah, that isn't as big. Like this row is a bigger deal than this row is, but it's still preferred to have the closing and the start of a new one as opposed to continuing that row down.
Okay. Yeah. So I have the first one and I didn't put it on the additional 2 that I created. And then when I looked over at yours, when I was trying to compare them, I said, oh, I didn't put the row there. So I wonder
Yeah.
what was
Yeah.
happening.
This one, these two lines you could omit and it would still work. But it is preferred every time that you go down the page, you use your own row.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Yes, Jen, you're calling me out on I forgot to add in some notes here. Getting lost in a div, you aren't learning HTML, right? If you aren't lost in your divs. Ariel, stop tempting them with prettier. We'll cover that later. The shortcut, Jen, is if you do period and then COL dash and then whatever number size you need and hit enter, it will make the div for you. Last call for questions. If you still don't have it working, that is okay. Try and work on it. Try and get it where you need it to be. And if you can't, we're going to spend the first couple minutes of class tomorrow touching in with you guys, making sure that everyone has a working copy of the code. Make sure there aren't any lingering questions, and we'll start from there tomorrow. Last call for questions tonight. Going once. Going twice. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you for a good class.